Hello, welcome or welcome back. My name is Anna, and I'm assuming if you clicked on this video, we probably run in somewhat similar internet circles, meaning you probably read a lot of weird girl fiction and probably don't need me to recommend you books like Milk Fed or Chlorine or even On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous. You've probably already read those, and even if you haven't, you're well aware of their existence by now. So today, to celebrate Pride Month, I decided to give you all the gift of 8 book recommendations that are more on the obscure side. Now, for the sake of this video, we're defining obscure as anything with less than 10,000 ratings on Goodreads. We're going to start with the least obscure, the more popular books, and then we're going to delve into books that have even less than 100 Goodreads ratings. So if we kick this video off and you're like, girl, I've heard of that book already, just you wait. Okay, I have some gems in here that maybe you've never heard of, and maybe you've heard of them all because you're just on it like that. But I'm hoping at least one of these will be a brand new recommendation for you. Kicking it off with the most popular book in the stack is Cassandra at the Wedding by Dorothy Baker. This book was recommended to me by a bookseller at a local indie bookstore, and I feel like he just clogged me so hard. He was like, I know you're going to love this book. He described it as being very subtle, which it is. This book now is labeled as queer and LGBT, and the main character is a lesbian, but I don't think that it's ever explicitly stated within the book, but it makes total sense within the context of the story. This book follows Cassandra, who's a graduate student, and her twin sister is getting married, and she's very dramatic about it. Like, for some reason, this just sends her into an absolute tizzy. I think a pretty easy interpretation of this book would be that it's two different paths that you can go down. Like, they're freaking twins. Okay, it's pretty cut and dry. It's like, here's the gay twin and here's the straight twin who's marrying a man. But I do think it goes a lot deeper than that. I think Cassandra is a very interesting multi-layered character. This book is described as a tragicomic, and I do think it's very similar to a lot of the quote unquote sad girl books that are very popular today, where we have this character who on the surface is very unlikable, but she also is, if we're all being honest with ourselves, deeply relatable. Like, we have all had this intense sense of jealousy at some point, I'm sure, whether we want to admit it or not. And we've all at least had those moments where we see someone very close to us living a life maybe different than ours, and we kind of think, what if that was me? Or why are they going down a path that I wouldn't go down? And just all these very strange and complex feelings that come up that are also very human. I think this is a very human book. It's also hilarious in a, again, quiet and subtle way. It is a very subtle book, but it's not a boring book. Like, there is drama. Cassandra is bringing drama to this wedding, okay? Next on the list was 6,100 Goodreads ratings. We have 100 Boyfriends by Brontes Purnell. I think this is actually his most popular book. I do think there's a loose narrative running throughout this book, mainly because it is kind of metafictional. So, we're seeing the highs and lows of someone's life, but it's more like a short story collection with each story focusing on a different quote unquote relationship hookup story about a man that our main character has been with. Purnell is so freaking hilarious. This book had me like laughing out loud, and not in a cringe way. He is genuinely so funny. Maybe one of the funniest writers I've ever read. I think this is definitely the kind of book you just want to share with everyone as far and wide as you can, because it's such a good time. Like, it's so much fun, which that's obviously why I'm sharing this with you today. But I bring that up because there's a story in here that's only like one page that's about our main character going to hook up with someone who's playing Dungeons and Dragons, I believe, and it turns out that he's Satan. And it's so funny that I had to share it with my straight male coworker who also plays Dungeons and Dragons, which I think was a risk, but he also found it funny. So, Mr. Purnell is transcending outside of the LGBT community. He's funny to everybody. I think if you get one thing from this video, I would check out his work, see if it's for you, because this is my Princess Diana right here, okay? Anything he writes, I will read it. Next up, with 5,100 Goodreads ratings, we have Shmutz by Felicia Berliner. I would say that the queer content in this book is not necessarily more subtle, but it's less at the forefront. Shmutz follows a young Hasidic Jewish woman who is being courted in this arranged marriage situation. Her wedding's coming up. She's also going to college. And as part of that, she's getting a laptop from her college that she keeps kind of secret. And on that laptop, she finds herself becoming addicted to internet porn. And it's interesting because this book paints porn in such a, I would say, almost a neutral lens, right? Because porn is this thing that she becomes hyper addicted to, but it also is sort of the catalyst for her self discovery, which I really liked that nuanced depiction of the porn industry, because I think so often when we have these conversations, it's very black and white. I think this book comes at it from a very nuanced perspective, and it's really interesting that that is the thing that drives our main character to begin to question her faith and even question herself a little bit, and even question her sexuality to an extent. And through questioning her sexuality, her religion, and things like that, she ends up making other friends at her college. And I think college also plays an important role in her kind of starting to question her religious beliefs. I really enjoyed this book. I think if you're a fan, again, of the typical like sad girl, weird girl genre, this is definitely for you. I think it takes a lot of the themes within those books and does them extremely well and gives a new perspective to them in a way that I really appreciated, and it feels very fresh and new. Next on the list with the 4,500 Goodreads ratings, we have Little Fish by Casey Plett. This is another book that I think deals with religion in a pretty interesting way. It follows a 30-year-old trans woman who begins to think that maybe her late Mennonite grandfather was actually a trans woman. But I think this is really just the catalyst that kind of sucks you into the story. And then it goes deeper into the lives of our main character and the lives of her friends and the things that they have to deal with as trans women. We deal with things like messy queer friend groups where everyone's kind of dating one another, sort of. We're dealing with alcoholism and sex work and other instances of substance abuse. We're dealing with depression and all of these struggles that are pretty prominent in like the trans and LGBT community as a whole, but also looking at them within the specific nuances of how those things affect trans women. And I think the beginning of this book builds a very solid foundation to where you love these characters, you get to know these characters very well, and there's something that happens midway through the book that just breaks you open completely, breaks all of our characters open completely. And I think that's where the book really shines. I don't want to give anything away, but it's like as you're reading, I just remember being like, oh my God, I know it's coming. I know it's coming, and I don't want this to be what's coming. And then it does, and it just kills you. And you just, it's one of those books you like have to put the book down, take a breather, be like, oh my gosh, these are things that really happen, because these people really begin to feel like people that and as a queer, not even as a queer person, but as someone who even has queer people in your life that you truly love, and especially trans women in your life that you truly love and try your best to empathize with, like, these are the things that they're experiencing and they're feeling. And then to see that happen, whether in real life or on the page, it just breaks you. And it's, I don't know. I don't know if I'm really articulating this very well, but all that to say, this was a highly impactful book. And I think religion does play a part in it. Obviously, we have it's, I think it's like on the back cover is the main plot of the book, is our main character trying to discover if her grandfather was actually trans. But honestly, I think it's more of a B plot. I think it kind of colors the way that our narrator sees herself and sees her family. But I think really the heart of this story is navigating life as a trans woman, and how our friendships and our found family and things like that like are really what can bolster us up, and finding understanding of ourselves within our friendships and relationships with other people. I don't know. I love this book, obviously. Highly recommend it. Next on the list with 1,300 Goodreads ratings is Tramps Like Us by Joe Westmoreland. I would say I enjoyed this book for very similar reasons to why I enjoyed Little Fish. This is a metafictional book about Joe, our main character, as he leaves his home in the Midwest and journeys down to New Orleans and then eventually up to San Francisco. And this all happens between like the mid 70s to the mid 90s. So I'm sure you can probably put the pieces together in what happens in this book. This was the second book that I finished this year, and it is still my favorite of the year so far. And I think it's going to be pretty hard to top. It just touched me so much, and I connected with this book so much. Again, similar to Little Fish, the story starts off, you're just getting to know Joe, you're getting to know all his friends, and Joe is such a likable character in this book, which I think is kind of funny for a metafiction. But even then, to say that he's likable doesn't mean that he isn't flawed. Joe is a flawed character, but I think he just reminds you so much of someone that you would be friends with, and all of the characters in this book remind me of people that I've been friends with, people that I am friends with. They just feel like people that you know. So as you continue to get to know them and see the struggles that they're going through, it hits that much harder. And again, as you can imagine, the AIDS crisis plays a pretty large part in this book. So it is pretty devastating and heartbreaking. But I do think there's this undercurrent of hope within it. And I think it's also just this beautiful love letter to like 80s and 90s San Francisco, which I have such a soft spot for. I love that in fiction. 100 Boyfriends is also mainly set in San Francisco, though I think it is maybe less of a character in that book as it is in this book. If you're into books that are more slice of life about people having a fun time in the 70s, 80s, 90s, I think that you would really enjoy this one. We're really getting to the more obscure titles now because next on the list we have Felt in the Jaw by Kristen Arnett, and this one has only 254 Goodreads ratings. I'm kind of shocked that more people haven't read this book because Kristen Arnett is also the author of Mostly Dead Things, With Teeth, and most recently Stop Me If You've Heard This One before, all of which I think are fairly popular within the circle of like lesbian weird girl fiction. It's a collection of short stories, and just like all of Arnett's other work, it follows lesbians in Florida. So, something about me, I have a very soft spot for Florida. I moved to Florida from Tennessee when I was about 13. Now, if you are someone from the South, like Georgia, Tennessee, something like that, you probably see Florida at least a little bit differently than other places in the country. Like, Florida is where you go to vacation, it is paradise. Okay, I moved from Tennessee to Daytona Beach, and I was like, this might as well be New York City to me. And I think that romanticization of Florida had stayed with me even throughout all the time that I lived there. I lived there from 13 to 18, moved back to Tennessee, and then immediately wanted to come back and lived there, I think, for like another 6 or 7 years. So a lot of my coming of age was in Florida. I live in California now, but honestly, there's a piece of me that misses the Florida that I grew up in and like all of the rose colored glasses memories of it that I have. So, all of that to say, I love a Florida book, and more than anyone else, I think Arnett captures Florida so well. Reading her books, it's like you're opening the door and just getting hit by that wall of humidity. You are sweaty, you are sticky, you are driving through the middle of Orlando and seeing like these crazy shops. And yes, there are people that suck, but there's also this whole other side of Florida that is still very left leaning, that is still very open, that will still accept you for who you are. And I think Arnett sees Florida as this multi layered place that I see it as too. And it's something that I think has just been so rare to find in fiction, but she captures it perfectly. And the way that it's captured in all her books is great. But I particularly love it in this story, not this story, this book. And I think a lot of that is because many of these stories are actually told from the perspective of children, which is interesting. I think Arnett deals with a lot of themes in all of her books of like isolation. I think Arnett really has the skills to capture the loneliness of childhood and particularly the loneliness of being a young queer child in Florida. Which, granted, I didn't move to Florida till I was 13, but even then, like being a teenager and being a lesbian in the Florida heat, maybe this sounds crazy, but it's just something that if you've never been a lesbian in the Florida heat, you'll probably never understand, okay? Even if you're not from Florida, even if you're not super interested in reading Florida books, even if you're not a lesbian and you're not super interested in reading lesbian books, I think there is a universal truth to the stories that Arnett is telling and things that we can all relate to because we're all human. We've all been lonely kids, we've all been lonely adults, we've all dealt with ambiguous situations, and I love that. I just love that something that feels so personal to me. Arnett it feels like she's just taken it out of me, put it on the page, and turned it into something that anyone could relate to. Do not judge me for how this book looks, okay? This book has been through the trenches. But next, with 99 ratings, we have A Fast Life by Tim DeLugos. DeLugos? I literally looked up how to pronounce this like right before this. Now I don't remember. I should know how to pronounce his name because I'm showing this book in this video. Every time I talk about this collection of poetry, I look up how to pronounce his name and then immediately forget it. This book is a collection of DeLugos's poetry throughout his life. DeLugos was a poet living in New York City primarily through like the 70s to late 80s, and he unfortunately did pass away from AIDS. I think what's so interesting about this book is obviously the poetry is amazing, but it is a chronological collection of some of DeLugos's poems. And because we're seeing it in chronological order, as you can imagine, we're starting in the early 70s, and a lot of his poems are very funny. They're very fun. They have these pop culture references of the time. They're pretty tongue in cheek. Like he's writing about it all. He's writing poems about sex and drugs and, again, just the little pop cultural references. And then as it goes on, there's still elements of that, but it becomes a lot more grounded. And it's interesting to see that development from start to finish. I found I really enjoy reading poets' collections throughout their whole life like that and being able to see how their style has developed. And listen, I know what you're thinking. Poetry is intimidating. Poetry isn't for you. But I do encourage you to just seek some poetry out, sit down and read a collection start to finish. I fell in love with poetry through a poetry class in college, and one of the biggest things that I learned there, or like one of the biggest pieces of knowledge that I gained, was just sitting down and reading a poetry collection cover to cover, reading it all the way through and absorbing the language and not necessarily feeling right off the bat like you need to ask yourself, what is this about? Like analyzing it right there in the moment. Like, I think poetry is something that obviously has so many different facets, but really I feel is something that is meant to be absorbed and felt first and foremost. I think poetry, I'm kind of going on a tangent here. This is not about the book, but I do think poetry is one of those very unique mediums where it's not always necessarily telling you a story. It is like literary art. It's like a painting. It's meant to evoke a feeling first and foremost, in my opinion. Um, it's also meant to just be fun. And I think Tim DeLugos is maybe one of the funnest poets that I've ever read. Hopefully, I've convinced you to, if not check out this collection, at least check out some poetry and at least check out, hopefully, some of Tim DeLugos' poetry because he is a gem. Last on the list, our most underground, underrated book is For Nights Like This One by Becky Bertho, which has a whopping 31 ratings on Goodreads. Now, don't judge a book by its cover, okay? I will admit I'm not the biggest fan of this cover, but I am a big fan of this book. For Nights Like This One is a pretty slim short story collection, and it primarily just follows a bunch of lesbian interracial relationships. The main word I would use to describe this book is tender. We're following a multitude of different couples, and they're all going through different things. Most of them are things that you would typically maybe expect to happen in a relationship, and some maybe not so much. But throughout it all, I think the majority of the stories, the women are very patient and kind with one another, and there's a lot of healing in this book. And I think a lot of healing within the relationships that these women have. And not to say that that's true of every story, because there are some stories here that are maybe a little more toxic. But aside from that, I think as a whole, this book is very tender, very sweet, and honestly kind of healing just to see these lesbian relationships, to see how much these women end up caring about one another. I don't know how you're gonna get your hands on this one. I bought it used at a bookstore for $5, and I saw it and was like, sure, I'll read that, and I'm glad that I did. Even if you don't pick this book up, consider this a recommendation to go to your used bookstore. If you are lucky enough to have a used bookstore with a gay and lesbian section, look through those lesbian books and pick up a random little lesbian book from like a feminist press from the 90s, and you might be shocked at what you find. Lesbians, gays, we've been around forever. And there's so much, I think, amazing literature that's untapped that doesn't get the same hype. Obviously, now, like, what old books really get the same hype as present day books? I'm fucking rambling. I've been talking too long. Anyway, I wore this very cute dress And I don't think you can even see it. You're just seeing the straps, but I did do my lesbian makeup for you. And this is where I'm going to end the video because now I'm talking about nothing. But I hope you read at least one of these books. Maybe add them to your TBR. If you have any obscure LGBTQIA plus book recommendations for me, drop them down below, even if they're not that obscure. If there's a gay book that you just really loved and you're like, I think this girl right here might like to read this book, let me know. But thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I will talk to you next time. Bye.